So, hi everyone. We're looking forward to a really great webinar discussion with you today. My name is Tyler Taba. I'm the Director of Resilience at the Waterfront Alliance. I will be moderating today's webinar and also presenting at some points. And we're joined by some of my amazing colleagues at Waterfront Alliance who will be presenting with me today. Um, we are talking today about our 2025 Waterfront and Resilience Platform, and you're actually the first people to see this year's platform as it is officially launching today, like it's officially launching right now. And so we're excited to dive right in and share some of our priorities with you all. So to open up here, I just want to quickly read the mission of the Waterfront Alliance as a reminder for those who have been with us for a while and also an introduction for those who might be joining for the first time. We are an alliance, as you can see and hear in our name. So our mission is that together with all of our alliance partners, we lead the way for thriving and resilient waterfronts, shorelines, and coastlines. And how do we do that? Well, we have several program areas that help us see that mission through. We advocate for climate resilience and infrastructure in planning, funding, and design. We advocate for public waterfront access. We advocate for green and sustainable maritime industry and a working waterfront that takes trucks off the road and leverages the power of the many harbor and tributaries across New York and New Jersey. We educate young people about climate impacts and, more importantly, the solutions to them, and so much more that you'll hear about today. I should also mention a couple of our signature events that pull all of this together. The first is our Waterfront Conference, which we host every year. We bring together leaders in the New York and New Jersey region, across the nation, and even internationally. And this year's conference is on May 13th in Lower Manhattan. And with all the news about everything happening around the nation and the ripples that that's having regionally and locally, there's not really a better place, I think, to hear about the challenges and opportunities ahead than the Waterfront Conference. So I hope to see many of you there. We also annually host City of Water Day, which is a day where we celebrate the water across New York and New Jersey. And that's happening this summer. And I know a link was just dropped in the chat, so you can learn more about that. There's a webinar coming up later in March where you can learn more about hosting a City of Water Day event and submitting an application for some funding support for City of Water Day. So as I mentioned, you'll be hearing from a few of our staff members today, those that are highlighted here in blue, but not all. And so here is just the full team behind all the work that we do. Everyone here is awesome, and I hope you get to know our full staff through these webinar series and our many, many events, including the conference and City of Water Day that I mentioned. And just to quickly highlight a few of our programs before we jump in, I'll start off with our WEDGE, or Waterfront Edge Design Guideline Program, which is booming. WEDGE is a rating system that promotes climate resilience, ecology, and public access and community responsiveness for all and any projects along the waterfront or shoreline, except for single-family homes. Here you can see a list of many of our WEDGE verified sites. There's 14 across the nation, lots in New York City where Wedge began, but now growing to Illinois, Florida, and North Carolina, and some new ones to be announced. So stay tuned for that. We also convened the Rise to Resilience Coalition, which is a coalition of more than 100 organizations who come together to make climate resilience a more urgent policy priority. Last year, we hosted our first in-person advocacy day up in Albany, where we met with state senators and assembly members to advocate for legislation that our coalition is supporting. One of those bills is a new one that was introduced called the Climate Resilient New York Act. Another was the Rain Ready New York Act, which unanimously passed in the state Senate last year. You'll hear more about all of this in just a moment. And these are just a few of the advocacy victories from last year, but there's certainly more, and we're happy to talk through some of those. And the last introductory slide before we jump into our platform, I just wanted to say Waterfront Alliance has really evolved in the past few years to account for the climate crisis and center the people who are the most impacted by it. At the core of our programs, we are committed to centering communities, especially the communities that are most impacted by climate change. You can see all of our programs here and how they center communities. Wedge, for example, is a tool that communities can use to hold projects accountable for resilience, ecology, and public waterfront access in the design and construction. Rise to Resilience is a coalition working with members of the community and advocates to promote legislation that prepares communities for the impacts of climate change. Our education work is working directly with members of the community to teach climate change in the classroom and in the field and help us create a more climate-informed community. And our maritime and access work is all about breaking down physical and social barriers to waterfront access and a clean and healthy working waterfront that serves the communities around them. So there's a connection to people and community in all of our work, and I just wanted to show you a little bit of a glimpse of how that looks in real time. So with that, I am excited to dive right in and start talking about our 2025 policy priorities. This is our 2025 Waterfront and Resilience Platform, and it covers all the things that Waterfront Alliance stands for. There is obviously a lot going on in the world, and I wish that we had a stance on every single thing in the world, but we are honing in here on what we have expertise in and where we can inspire the greatest change related to our mission. And so there's definitely things that are going to be in this or that are not going to be in this platform that you think we should be working on, and we would love to hear those. And there's also definitely going to be things in this platform that you didn't know we were working on, and we would love to share those with you and work with you on all those priorities. So please don't hesitate to reach out during or after this webinar with any thoughts or questions about anything in here or outside of here, and we will have some time at the end for questions and discussions. So our 2025 platform is broken down into 6 major themes. And if you saw our platform from last year, you will recognize many of them. And if you know Waterfront Alliance, you probably know us from one or hopefully many of these categories. And for the next maybe 30 minutes or so, I think we'll be reviewing key concepts in each of these sections. And so to kick us off with section 1, I'm going to start with Maite, who is our climate policy fellow, and she's going to help us go through the first theme of our 2025 platform, which is climate change, resilience, and adaptation. And it's the longest section in our platform. So Maite, my first question for you is if you could just talk a little bit about how Waterfront Alliance frames climate resilience in this policy platform.
All right, thanks, Tyler. That's a very interesting question because resilience, the concept of resilience can be vague and confusing, and it's used in many different contexts and fields. But climate resilience can be defined as the capacity of all of our systems, social, economic, environmental, to cope with climate-related risks and impacts, responding or reorganizing in ways that let these systems functional, but also improving their capacity for transformation. So, for example, climate resilience can be built by integrating the climate risks into short and long-term planning projects, or by preparing for different scenarios and potential disasters, or by redesigning and improving our infrastructure, natural or built infrastructure, as solutions to reduce our risks. And that conceptual framework is reflected in the policy platform for Waterfront Alliance, precisely because there is no single solution to address the climate crisis. And Waterfront Alliance believes in a holistic approach to addressing these impacts, and climate resilience can be operationalized within the organization through different strategies that tackle different aspects of climate resilience.
That's amazing. And thank you for sharing that. And so I think that tees up the next section in the question here really well, which is if you could get into some of the specifics and some of the key themes that you were talking about there in terms of operationalizing climate resilience. So how are we doing that in this year's policy platform?
Okay, yeah. So, for example, we break out climate resilience into categories like infrastructure and design and governance and planning, or funding and investments. And some others we'll talk about later on for Hannah and Tyler. So for instance, starting with infrastructure and design, these focuses on gray and green infrastructure, or combining the two together. So from storm surge barriers to rain gardens to retrofitting homes, or limiting irresponsible development. It's sort of like an all of the above approach, and it's kind of complicated because it depends on the site conditions and the communities and the vision that the community members have for their own community and what climate resilience means for them. But one of these solutions or projects is the largest coastal infrastructure project, which is led by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, titled the New York, New Jersey Harbor and Tributaries Study, or also known as HATS. And Waterfront Alliance has been has been collaborating in this project and focusing specifically on advocating for this project to be adequately funded in the long term. And at this time, when federal funding for climate resilience projects and initiatives is uncertain or unclear, we're advocating for these types of collaborative and innovative projects to continue to be funded or expanded as investments for our own future. And another example is that New York, for example, has a voluntary buyout program, and Waterfront Alliance has been calling for the program to be permanent. New Jersey has a very successful similar program called Blue Acres, and we would like New York to follow this example. And another thing that is related to infrastructure and design is how long it takes for these designs and projects to actually be implemented or completed. And because of that, we also need to think about the impacts and the real disasters that come along while these projects are in the design or in the pipeline. So every time that a climate resilience project is being discussed, we need to take into account the community members and how they are aware of the climate risk and increasingly learning of all of the climate impacts and how they can prepare best for all types of scenarios. And I guess related to that, in disaster preparedness, Waterfront Alliance has also been working in New York City to update and improve the existing disaster preparedness materials. And for example, connecting NYC 311 reporting to flooding or emergency management or preparedness resources, so everyone has access to all of this information. And now pivoting to the second section on governance and planning, this section is straightforward about good planning, good leadership for climate resilience. One example is having statewide climate resilience plan in an office that is dedicated to climate resilience priorities and that oversees all of these priorities throughout the state. And this is not new or out of nowhere. There are at least 15 states throughout the country that have established climate resilience offices or chief resilience officers, including right next to us, New Jersey, but also as far as Florida, California, Alaska. So now we're currently working on legislation for New York, and we'll get to in those details in a minute. And now that I mentioned New Jersey, one of the best examples in governance and planning is their Department of Environmental Protection proposing a set of rules called the New Jersey's Resilient Environments and Landscapes, also known as NJ-REAL. And the purpose is to modernize the land resource protection rules in order to build resilience for coastal and inland flooding and all of the climate related impacts in that sense. And they're the most robust rules in the nation. So this is the kind of bold leadership and holistic approach to climate resilience planning that we support. And back to New York, we can, specifically New York City, one of the examples is the Bureau of Coastal Resilience that was created as part of Plan YC, which is the city's strategic plan for climate action. And Waterfront Alliance wants the city to take a step forward because creating an office from one administration is just not enough. So we're advocating for legislation to codify it, create a permanent home of this bureau within the New York City Department of Environmental Protection. And so this bureau can exist, can be well-funded regardless of the administration, right? And now we can look at sort of like the behind the scenes of some of the legislations that we're working on that reflect these categories. So the first one is the Climate Resilience New York Act that Tyler mentioned. This bill, straightforward, establishes a statewide climate resilience plan for New York, appoints a chief resilience officer, and an interagency task force. And this is a task force. This is also modeled after other states, like I mentioned earlier. And it was introduced last year for the first time. We've been working on it to build support across the legislature, and we're hoping to get it passed this year. Now, the second one is the Rain Ready New York Act. This is a bit tricky, but the bill basically specifies the legal clarification for sewer and water authorities to manage stormwater, to be able to mitigate flooding more efficiently and effectively. So the bill was also introduced last year. It passed unanimous in the Senate, like Tyler said, but stalled in the Assembly. So it has been reintroduced this year, and we're working to get it passed this year as well. And this bill is particularly important in the current context with so much uncertainty on federal leadership and funding for climate resilience. And such a simple legal clarification or governance solution can help New York find innovative ways to maintain and improve the stormwater management programs going forward, which is something that we need a lot urgently. And then the last one is Intro 1067, this one specifically to New York City Hall. And this bill creates an assistance program for homeowners that are retrofitting their homes due to flooding, specifically groundwater flooding. This effort has been led by the Southeast Queens Residents Environmental Justice Coalition. And we've joined the effort, and we're advocating for it to include rainfall flooding and to expand the incentives for the homeowners to implement these retrofits. And now the last one that I'm going to talk about, it's separate but also related to everything else. It's funding and investments. And Waterfront Alliance believes that funding for climate resilience must be a priority. It should be reflected as such in the city, in the state, in the federal budgets every year. And this is why Waterfront Alliance strongly supported, for example, the New York Environmental Bonds Act. And we're still urging the state to raise these funds for environmental justice communities. And for example, to allocate at least 50% of the buyout funding for New York City, which needs it the most. And on the other hand, Waterfront Alliance has also been supporting the City Council and the New York State legislation to eliminate the water rental payment. So we consider this to be sort of like a regressive tax, and it takes money away from the Department of Environmental Protection and moves it to the general city fund. And we want to see this department well-funded unconditionally in the long run. And so as part of thinking of climate resilience holistically, Waterfront Alliance has also been involved in advocating for New York City parks for increased funding for this department. A lot of the city parks are in the waterfront, which is something that we don't necessarily think about. And they can be the first line of defense for flooding, either with gray or with green infrastructure solutions. So we want to see better funding for both their maintenance and operation, but also for improving these protections against flooding, especially for neighborhoods that are at the highest risk for flooding. Now, all of these projects, advocacy efforts, and initiatives are the ways in which Waterfront Alliance has operationalized this holistic approach into realistic, measurable, efficient, effective actions for climate resilience. I hope this wasn't that confusing, but now we'll move into the next section of the policy platform, which is extreme heat.
That was amazing. Not confusing at all. I think you did a great job covering a lot there, from broad themes and getting down into specific examples. So thank you so much, Maite. And there's obviously so much more in the platform, and I think you did a great job of highlighting the key points. And to slightly shift gears here, to your point, we've been focusing a lot on flooding and water with respect to climate change, resilience, and adaptation. But one thing we know is that, as you also mentioned so well, resilience is more than just coastal and inland flooding issues. And there's actually more deaths and illnesses that are caused by extreme heat than any other climate impact in our region. So I'm going to turn it over to Farhana and ask if you could tell us a little bit about some of Waterfront Alliance's policy priorities around extreme heat.
Thanks, Tyler. Totally agree that extreme heat is a growing and a critical issue. And just to add some numbers to this, according to the New York Department of Environmental Conservation, DEC, extreme heat is a leading cause of weather-related deaths in New York. and the most vulnerable populations, includes older adults, children, and those with chronic illnesses. They're really at higher risk. And the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection in 2003, they had a really good stat that was saying that almost 120,000 heat-related illnesses that required emergency department visits in the U.S., which unfortunately, 92% of that was occurring between May and September. So just to sort of give you a sense of, what's really happening with heat-related illnesses and how much it's really affecting not just our region, but really across the country. So along the lines of New Jersey is doing incredible work. New Jersey put together this extreme heat resilience action plan, and I just want to piggyback off of Maite's idea and concept that there is no single solution to climate resilience. You can almost see that in the action plan. It's really a strategy that is developed to address the increasing threat of extreme heat, but it does so by building on the state's broader climate change resilience strategy, and it focuses on mitigating the impacts of extreme heat through multiple ways. And the first is through community input and community engagement. And so it's building awareness through webinars and public comments. And the second is through interagency, actions, which is so critical, working together to improve infrastructure, enhance public health responses, and ensuring the availability of cooling centers. Things like the Heat Hub New Jersey is a great example of how there is a single website that provides key information on extreme heat, includes live weather alerts, surveys, and educational resources. It serves as a central source for all things related to extreme heat in New Jersey. We Along the same lines, we're trying to sort of also Waterfront Alliance is also advocating for the increasing of funding for heat cooling assistance for both New York and New Jersey, to ensure residents have access to these essential cooling services. So not just, New Jersey's doing a wonderful job, but let's ensure that we continue to get that funding. Both for both states. And so HEAP, which is the Home Energy Assistance Program, which provides financial assistance to low-income households to help with heating and cooling costs. This includes the purchasing and installation of air conditioners and fans. So with each summer, setting new records for high temperatures, the need for cooling assistance really is growing. And so we strongly support additional federal and state funding for HEAP. And with this funding, we also advocate for the Low Income Heat Energy Assistance Program, which is LIHEAP, which then also subsidizes the summer utility bills. And as a part of that, it also expands program eligibility. The last piece of legislation that I wanted to sort of share with all of you, which Waterfront Alliance is really dedicated to, is Intro 998, which is proposed by the New York City Council to address the issue of extreme heat by establishing a comprehensive cooling center program, kind of similar to what New Jersey is doing. This bill was introduced in July 2024, which aims to codify the city's cooling center program to ensure that there are enough cooling centers available during heat-related emergencies. And the key points of the legislation really includes the designation of cooling centers, thinking about where vulnerable populations reside, and making sure that there are cooling centers that are sort of around those areas, as well as a public awareness campaign of where these cooling centers would be. And then finally, just sort of a survey and a report of the utilization of this program. It's fun stuff that we're hoping to see enacted in both New York and New Jersey.
Awesome. Thank you, Farhana. That was really helpful, and always glad to hear that there's other states right next to us that we can learn from that are leading on a lot of this stuff. And so hoping that New York can kind of pick up some of that work that you mentioned. And so just as we move into the final category here for our climate change resilience and adaptation section, I'll just go quickly and talk about the main policy priority under the developing the best waterfronts possible section, which is related to our Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, or WEDGE program. So the main goal that we're calling for here is to codify Wedge, and we see that as a pathway to getting more sites to go through Wedge, um, the Wedge review process over time. And already Wedge is embedded in many RFPs, including in the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, or NYSERDA, in San Diego's Unified Port District, in New York New York State Battery Park City Authority, the New York City Economic Development Corporation. And also in communities like New Rochelle, Wedge is a zoning requirement. In Miami, Wedge is listed in 2 ordinances. And so we really see this as a way to continue to boost Wedge as an incentive and requirement for projects in both the public and private sector to adhere to more climate resilient, ecological, and public access in their design. And one other thing that we're excited about is that we're taking Wedge out into the Mississippi River Basin thanks to a partnership between Waterfront Alliance and the Walton Family Foundation. And so we've got some really great prospects for new projects along the Mississippi River, and we're excited to see how Wedge might fit into local ordinances and zoning laws in these new cities and states. And the second bullet here is just focused on thinking about ways to embed Wedge in state and federal programs that support resilience and flood protection. FEMA, for example, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which has been in the news quite a bit lately, has a community rating system, and they also have various federal grant programs. And so we're looking at ways to find overlap and alignment between federal and state grant programs, and opportunities that we could see Wedge maybe as an incentive to doing more resilient projects. And so that wraps up our first section, but our next section is very much related. And this is actually a new section in the policy platform from last year, but again, very related to waterfront design is waterfront permitting. And permitting has a very long history at Waterfront Alliance, and one that has evolved quite a bit over time. When we refer to waterfront permitting, we are talking about the permit and the application process for building, reconstructing, or repairing residential and commercial buildings, docks, piers, bulkheads, and seawalls along the waterfront. So back in 2010, when we were called the Metropolitan Waterfront Alliance, we had released a report called Improving Waterfront Permitting in the New York and New Jersey Harbor Estuary. And to get to that report, we brought together hundreds of waterfront stakeholders at a series of task forces throughout 2008 to discuss some of the biggest challenges and opportunities for the waterfront community in the New York and New Jersey harbor region as a whole. And that was 17 years ago. And I'm 28, so I was not a part of those task forces when I was 11 years old, but I share that to highlight that this has been something that we've been active in for quite some time. And actually, the number one recommendation from that 2010 report was to create a simple and clear guide to waterfront permitting. And that culminated into the New York City Economic Development Corporation's Waterfront Navigator program and website that is still up and active today. Okay, so where are we now? Well, last fall, we hosted a waterfront permitting symposium where we again convened stakeholders to hear more about some of the ongoing challenges. In particularly, we are looking for solutions that Waterfront Alliance can advocate for from a regulatory or legislative lens. And here is where we landed. The first 2 recommendations on this slide are related to transparency. And so for starters, obtaining a waterfront permit is still a process that relies heavily on paperwork, mail, and in-person delivery of documents. It is 2025, and so we feel very strongly that there needs to be an online enterprise system where applicants who are applying for a waterfront permit can track their progress, receive feedback digitally, and to be able to have this kind of website that you see some examples on the slide here on the right is from the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environment, where they do have this kind of online enterprise system. And so we'd like to see New York take a step in that direction. We are also thinking about speeding up the process of these applications without having to cut corners in the review or approval process. And one area where I think we can easily speed things up is by offering more meetings between applicants and even without applicants. So regulators like the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation or the New York City Small Business Services or Department of Buildings should be meeting more frequently. I don't want to get super in the weeds here, but the city and state do have different guidelines, excuse me, for their waterfront permitting applications, and that causes a lot of confusion among applicants who are needing approval from both or multiple agencies. And so more meetings between the regulators can help actually minimize some of that conflicting feedback. So that happens between just the regulators, but there should also be a process with the applicants and the regulators. And so for that, we're thinking about a pre-application meeting where both are in the room and applicants can ask questions and get early feedback so they can address some of their early concerns through the process and minimize that back and forth and responding to feedback. So really, again, here focused on speeding up the process and transparency. Um, and then the latter two recommendations here are related to staffing and clarity. So we are big on staffing support here at Waterfront Alliance. You will never see us demanding an agency or advocating for an agency to do something without acknowledging the need for additional staff capacity to make that happen. And Maite touched on that a bit in the previous section with respect to the statewide climate resilience plan and the Bureau of Coastal Resilience in New York City. And it's no different here. The permitting process is very slow, and we recognize that part of that is because the permitting agencies are working with very limited capacity. And so these offices should be staffed up, and we should be aiming for a speedy, efficient, modern, and state-of-the-art permitting process. And then finally, there's a legal definition for water-dependent use in the New York State public land law that leaves a lot of room for interpretation about what actually is classified as a water-dependent use. It's actually it's inherently very challenging, I think, to fit everything into one legal definition. So we know that's a tough task, but we also know that if we want more innovative and more creative waterfront projects, that definition does need to be expanded. And it probably starts off with a philosophical question about what the future of our waterfronts look like. What do we want them to look like? What does the state want them to look like? And I think that's how we can maybe get to thinking about what actually is a water dependent use. So those are a few of the recommendations that we have for waterfront permitting. This is something that we're going to be working on over the course of the year. And so if this is of interest to you, please do reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and work with you. And then now, let me see if I can get the slide to move. Yes. Okay. So moving as far away as possible from the wonky world of permitting and into what I think is Waterfront Alliance's coolest program. For those who don't know, Jake is our education program manager. He works with thousands of students and teachers across New York City to host and share climate and environmental curriculum and field labs, workshops across many communities, on many waterfront communities. And so I want to turn it over to Jake to share a little bit more about our Estuary Explorers program. So Jake, could you tell us a little bit more about our Estuary Explorers program?
I would be happy to, Tyler. Thank you so much for that wonderful intro. Yes, so Waterfront Alliance has an experiential education program that we call Estuary Explorers. This started roughly 8 years ago with the main goal of connecting students and teachers with their local waterfront. I think, and I hope to anyone on this call, it's no secret that New York City is a city of water. We have over 520 miles of coastline. However, more than 50% of the students that we've worked with over the past 8 years haven't been to their waterfront, either because of its reputation as not being an accessible place, either because they don't know it exists, or they just kind of see it as this area that's not welcome for them. And so our programs run from anywhere to 2 to 4 to 8 weeks long, where we'll go directly into the classroom. We'll introduce the most basic topics around resilience, around climate change, and give them an introduction to the New York, New Jersey Harbor Estuary. We'll touch on the ecology, the geography, and the history of the harbor and kind of how it all relates to New York City and to the greater metropolitan area. We also will bring students and teachers directly out to the water to do anything from water quality testing, looking at the pH, salinity, temperature of the water, and seeing how that kind of ties in with resilience. And then we'll also have more STEAM-focused activities where we'll have the students create murals at the waterfront, while also identifying, waterfront features, really trying to create a more cohesive program. We also lead teacher trainings, where we'll directly work with teachers from across New York City and New York State to lead CTLE-sponsored programs where we'll dive into anything from the resources that we have, such as our Coastal Resilience Education Toolkit, in our Estuary Explorers workbook, to more complex topics around, creating a theory of change and how, they can encourage their students to get involved in their local communities, to, address things such as climate anxiety and eco-anxiety. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that, Jake. And I should also note that if you're a parent here on this webinar and you're interested in this kind of programming, you should get in touch with Waterfront Alliance about bringing estuary explorers to your kids' school. And there was a link dropped in the chat there where you can explore that a little bit more. So sticking with you here on this, Jake, we're talking about policy priorities. So maybe you could walk us through a couple of Waterfront Alliance's policy priorities around climate and estuary education, and maybe how other states are leading the way and how we could be learning from them on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it is appropriate to say that New York State does stand out among the tri-state area as the one state that does not mandate climate education in their public schools. Connecticut has recently done it, and New Jersey is really leading the charge across the country as being this model of how to implement climate education in schools. And so Waterfront Alliance is advocating for climate education in New York State public schools, working alongside the Climate and Resilience Education Task Force, and trying to implement these standards in schools. This would mandate standards and courses of instruction for pre-K to grade 12 students, looking at the causes and impacts of climate change on individuals, environments, communities, and learning how to evaluate solutions. I really love the language of this bill. I think it's important to look at both the causes and impacts and look at the solutions. This is something that we try to do in Estuary Explorers and something that we try to also teach with our teacher trainings. Throughout New York City, we haven't really seen any desire not to implement these, types of programs in schools. I think the thing that we mostly hear from teachers is lack of capacity and lack of support to do so. And a bill such as this will provide that support to do it. This bill also leads to more professional development for teachers and creates an Office of Climate Education and Workforce Development with the goal of, having these students learn about, climate impacts, climate solutions. They'll want to go on into their undergraduate and professional lives of how to implement this in future green and blue jobs. And then the second priority that we have at Waterfront Alliance is mandating water safety education in New York City and state public schools through three different bills. So the first is to develop a New York State Department of Education water safety curricula. And so this is really looking at, having New York City Parks and the DOE work together to coordinate language and programs of how to teach water safety and how to distribute these materials to students and parents across New York State. And then also creating a water safety education prevention materials at a citywide level through Intro 1059, as well as conducting a feasibility study on how high school students can become lifeguards. It's been a few years, but we are still experiencing massive lifeguard shortages across the city. And with, I think, a percentage of something around 10% of New York City residents not being able to swim or know how to swim, this is more important than ever. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Jake. There's a lot there, and it's really exciting. And I'm definitely hoping that New York joins the Connecticut and New Jersey on that education work. So we'll be monitoring that. And yeah, thanks for sharing all of that with us. So shifting into our fourth section here now, I want to turn it over to Farhana to talk about some of the work that we've been doing really since our inception, creating and protecting public access to the waterfront and also supporting a sustainable and growing maritime industry. So Farhana, maybe you could share some key themes that Waterfront Alliance is doing around this work, and starting with public access, what is the latest and the greatest?
Thanks, Tyler. There is so much that Waterfront Alliance is doing around access and public access and really trying to ensure that, New York and New Jersey Harbor with its many waterways and coastlines really continue to offer recreation and health benefits, as well as, really providing spaces and places to work and play. The one thing that we are aware of is that only a small percentage of these areas are publicly accessible in high need neighborhoods, highlighting significant disparities. Waterfront Alliance recognizes that equitable access to waterfront spaces is really critical, especially for communities facing social and economic challenges. At the same time, we're also seeing the move to revitalize waterfronts with parks, condos, restaurants, and how that has transformed many neighborhoods. Yet industrial waterfront space, which is vital to, the national energy transition, local manufacturing, and port operations, is increasingly limited. It's critical to protect these assets, and ensuring public access is essential. And we really advocate for the resilient and equitable waterfront access in every single neighborhood. And part of this is to find a beautiful and innovative way to create waterfront access at industrial sites. And so Waterfront Alliance recently put out a report, which is called Integrating Industry and Public Access for a Sustainable Future, which will be dropped in the chat, which outlines best practices for welcoming public access to these areas. The Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, or WEDGE, which Tyler had sort of mentioned earlier, requires public access as a part of their verification process, which serves as a catalyst for increasing public access on industrial sites. This then leads to the next priority, which is to really execute commitments made in the Department of City Planning comprehensive waterfront plan. This plan aims to address inequities in community access and promote inclusive design. It also acknowledges the effects of climate change and emphasizes the critical role that New York City's waterfront parks and parklands have in the city's resilience and equity strategy. So it's multi-layered. The plan also seeks to advance recreational water access, on-water access, as well as to water access, really redefining the way that residents interact with their waterfront, and ideally also creating the sense of stewardship and healthy communities. The next priority that we focus on is integrating waterfront access into greenway expansion, which recently has received a lot of attention and has received a lot of funding to connect greenways across all of New York City. We also know that greenways are mostly found along the waterfronts, and Waterfront Alliance really believes that connecting greenways to the waterfront is again essential to enhance community well-being, recreation, and to a certain extent also climate resilience. But we also know that not all waterfront sites are created equal, and so Waterfront Alliance has also created a decision-making tool that ensures both physical and social criteria to prioritize the sites that are safe and serve neighborhoods most disconnected to their water. Details about this tool actually can be found in Waterfront Alliance's report, which is called Activating New York City-owned waterfront sites for recreation and access, which I think just got put in the chat. Waterfront Alliance is now also creating a blueprint for regional planning and resilience alongside public access that will support thousands of residents, ideally, who could then advocate for their local waterfront access in their neighborhood. And that will be launched in April. So we're really excited to sort of showcase that and share that.
Amazing. Thank you, Farhana. I love the connecting waterfront access to greenway expansions. I bike all over the city, and so I'm on the greenways quite a bit and would love to see better waterfront access and some of those greenways to be fixed up a little bit more. So that's really exciting. And then I guess moving into the next section, you talked a little bit already about industrial waterfront land within the context of public access, but there's a lot more that's happening with industrial waterfront land and maritime and the working waterfront. So maybe you could share some of our key priorities in the maritime space. And then our last section is on renewable energy. So why don't you just take us home through that one in the next 5 minutes or so?
Sure, I can quickly cover some of our key priorities. as you said, waterfront industrial land is really critical. And it is so critical to safeguard these lands, especially from non-industrial and non-manufacturing real estate development. Industrial sites on the water are critical for maintaining the economic vitality and resilience of the harbor region, and really play a key role in supporting essential maritime activities, reducing truck congestion, and minimizing greenhouse gases by facilitating the efficient transport of goods. And we're seeing this in a couple of different ways. Especially when sort of thinking about the challenges of climate change and global supply chain disruptions, it is really important to sort of preserve and modernize these industrial areas that can also provide high-paying jobs and support our middle class. So we believe that more goods should be transported by water. We support investments in maritime highways that provide jobs, keep trucks off the road, and improve air quality. By also activating these working piers, we can, as I said earlier, keep the trucks off the road, right? And that has a huge impact both for pedestrian safety, but also for, reducing emissions, air quality, et cetera. And that can then also increase freight by barge to a closer final destination, right? So that reduces the time in transit as well. You can go to the next slide. As we continue to commit to the maritime, which I would love for us to do, we also need to do this in a way that is continuously reducing emissions through investing in green operations, electrification, and other related infrastructure. We will see an increase in cleaner vessels operations as well as healthier communities. Greening maritime operations is essential for the region's working ports, piers, and things like industrial warehouses from Red Hook to South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, as well as Newtown Creek and Howland Hook. So along the lines of a greener region, Waterfront Alliance also advocates for the ferry service expansion. We envision several new routes that could serve residents with a greener, faster transit option that would reshape transportation in the region. Waterfront Alliance recommends prioritizing the expansion from Staten Island to Brooklyn or Bay Ridge, specifically an extension of the Soundview line to City Island, and an extension of the Soundview line to LaGuardia Airport with potentially a connection at East 90th Street. Moving on to renewable energy, and I'll try to get through this pretty quickly. So we know that offshore wind has been in the news quite a bit over the past few months. We've seen recent projects in the region face potential delays or pauses due to potential challenges. Despite this, the offshore wind industry will boost supply chain and maritime businesses and will ensure energy security and grid reliability across the region. Waterfront Alliance continues to support the growth and expansion of these renewable energy projects. And I just want to say that again, we continue to support the growth and expansion of these projects. And while doing so, Waterfront Alliance believes that it is also necessary to think about the port infrastructure and the nearby communities that can further be resilient to climate change. So integrating things like the Waterfront Edge design guidelines, especially around port development, is really critical. Things like revitalizing manufacturing, staging, and maintenance facilities to handle primary components. This all can be further aligned through the Waterfront Edge design guidelines. Now, along the same lines, we also believe that it is essential to have an education campaign to accurately represent the benefits of offshore wind energy and to counter misinformation. Offshore wind projects are really vital for not only achieving our renewable energy goals, but also combating climate change. Being able to use transparent communication and evidence-based information to highlight the environmental and economic advantages really helps to ensure that communities are well informed about the true impacts and benefits to offshore wind. I'll stop there.
Amazing. Thank you, Farhana. That was a lot to cover. And I did not mean to rush you. I actually accidentally clicked advance on the slide. That wasn't me just trying to push you through. So thank you so much for covering all of that. And there you have it. That is, there's a lot there. And believe it or not, we only covered a portion of what is in the platform. So there's a lot, obviously, and we're really excited to hear feedback from you all and from all of our partners about how we can work together to accomplish a lot of the goals that are here in the policy platform. And so, before we open it up to Q&A, I actually, there is one question in the Q&A that I want to answer, and then I have a question for our panelists. So I'll go a little roundabout here. There was a question about whether or not we are advocating for NOAA, which is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And I think that comes from, excuse me, that comes from all the news and everything happening around jobs and funding being cut from some of the many really critical environmental and climate agencies at the federal level. And so we did actually just a couple days ago, or maybe just yesterday, put out a statement around all. I can't, if it was yesterday, I can't believe that it was just yesterday, but maybe it was Friday. We put out a statement about the unfolding federal crisis around climate and funding and jobs. And so I know we have a link handy for that. And so we'll continue to be promoting and amplifying the need for agencies like NOAA and FEMA and the EPA, who actually do provide life and death support to many communities that are impacted when a disaster hits, but also before and after the disaster. And some of the funding that helps support rebuilding and resiliency that we're talking about here today. And so we're thinking about how to engage with our leaders in the state and federal government, particularly our congressional delegation here, to make sure that we are protecting the funding that is coming to our region, but also across the nation for those agencies, and NOAA being one of them. So I really appreciate that question and wanted to make sure we had time to answer it. So one question that I had before I check, I don't see anything else in the Q&A quite yet, but so while we wait for questions to populate, I did want to go around in a quick little rapid fire and ask everybody on the team here if they could just say from this long list of priorities, what is the one key theme that you are most excited about if we get it right? So Farhana, do you want to maybe kick it off?
Sure, happy to go first. Honestly, I am really excited about the work around extreme heat that New Jersey is doing. They're a model really for the way that, again, that there is no single solution to this work, right? They've done an incredible job in putting together their action plan in terms of sort of thinking holistically about emergency preparedness, about awareness, about cooling infrastructure, interagency coordination. I think so many other places can essentially leverage and learn from, and extreme heat is a concern everywhere. It's not just for this region, it's not just for this nation, it's globally. And so I really do think that this could be a model that is scaled up, is learned from, is foundational for other governance structures that are looking at how to manage extreme heat from a community level.
Thanks, Farhana. Jake, do you want to go next?
Yeah, absolutely. Love that answer for Hannah. Of course, everything education and everything in the platform I'm very supportive of, but I think on the theme of extreme heat, I think everything around water safety and getting more people around New York and New Jersey into the water is probably what I'm most excited about. Through all the programs that I do and the educators that I work with do, we love bringing students out to the water, but the one question that we always get, regardless of where we are, is when can we go in the water? And so seeing a lot of initiatives in New York City and New York State and how we're kind of learning from New Jersey, and seeing all of us kind of just like have that last push to get more people into places, in beaches at Rockaway and Coney Island, potentially into the East River is just very, very exciting for me.
Love that. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, I saw something, maybe we can find it, about a workshop around reclassifying part of the Harlem River, I think, for potentially getting in the water. And so I think it's exciting to see some of those steps coming through. And yeah, totally love that answer. And Maite, I'll turn it over to you to close us out here. What are you most excited about if we can get it right?
Yeah. This might not be like the most exciting topic for everyone, but I am personally most excited about funding. Like we all know the solutions. We need to get closer to a climate resilient system. We know but that's not even half of the equation. Like the biggest part of the equation is long-term, dedicated, unconditional funding for climate resilience. And without funding, we can't do what we need to do and what we know that needs to be done. So we gotta follow the money, chase it, attract it, manifest it, everything in any way we can.
Yes, manifest it. I love that. Amazing. Well, we have a couple minutes here at the end, and so I did see one other question come in the chat around Brooklyn Marine Terminal and some of the challenges and opportunities. So that naturally is going to for Hannah, but I think you covered it a bit with the protecting industrial land. So maybe if you want to just expand a little bit more about that and what our role is and where we're at with everything BMT. And it's a big question, so take it however you will.
That's great. Thank you so much for this question. I think it's really critical. I think it's really important. It's a great example of how maritime assets are not necessarily protected the way they should be, and how there is a lack of regional planning around the maritime. And so one of the things that, Waterfront Alliance is advocating for is for a study to be done around the maritime in general for the region, and potentially, what could be done? What's the future of the maritime? And that's not being thought of at BMT currently. And Waterfront Alliance sits as the chair of a advisory committee, which then sort of channels our thoughts and ideas and expertise to the task force. And this is something that we are strongly advocating for just a comprehensive study to really understand the uses before any major changes are being made. I hope that helps.
Yeah, no, that was great. Okay, amazing. And then we have one final question here. It is from an anonymous attendee about any volunteer opportunities through the Waterfront Alliance for advocacy. So I can take a quick crack at that and then also turn it over to the other panelists to answer. So there's definitely lots of ways to get involved with the advocacy, especially right now as we're starting to ramp up and get into the heat of the legislative session and the city and state budget. So we always have action alerts and sign-on letters that we encourage people to support and sign on to, and those are targeted to your local state senators, assembly members, congressional members. Really depends on what the ask is, and so that's really a great way to get involved. If you're part of an organization or a nonprofit or a civic group, we do convene the Rise to Resilience Coalition, and we're always looking for different perspectives and support within the coalition's advocacy. We're gearing up to do another advocacy day up in Albany, and we usually do some kind of teach-in or workshop with the New York City Council. We also testify at city council hearings and state hearings. And so there's lots of ways to support either through submitting testimony as an individual or getting your local organizations involved with Rise to Resilience. So definitely reach out if that is of interest to you. I can also put my email in the chat for anybody who's interested in getting more involved with our advocacy work. And with that, I think we are hitting time, or actually, Farhana, go ahead.
I also wanted to highlight really quickly, we have coastal cleanups as well as a lot of educational programs where we bring in volunteers all the time. I can also put my email in the chat, and you can feel free to contact either Tyler or myself to get more involved.
Amazing. Okay, well, that about wraps us up. We're right at 1 o'clock. So thanks, everybody. Thanks to our amazing staff and panelists for sharing all of the priorities that we're working on. And thank you all for joining us. I hope this was helpful. Take a look at the platform, learn more about it, get involved. We're super happy to work with you all and share this work with you all. So thank you very much and hope you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, everyone.